Drugs have been seized as a result of this task force. We try to put this in perspective for you. This would be filling 4 18-wheelers. 4. All the drugs just in the last month that have been taken off the street.
The door didn't just open. It exploded inward under the force of a battering ram. Flashing red and blue lights cut through the darkness. Boots pounded across hardwood floors. Federal agents moved room to room with disciplined precision, weapons raised, clearing corners in seconds. But this was not an abandoned warehouse. It was the private residence of a sitting judge in Minneapolis. Inside, agents uncovered something that immediately escalated the case to a national level. Roughly $100 million in bundled currency. Large quantities of cocaine, fentanyl, and heroin packaged for distribution. What appeared at first to be a single raid quickly revealed itself as the opening move in a 43-day coordinated federal operation. This was not about one property. It was about dismantling a criminal structure believed to span multiple states and international supply chains. Within days, arrests began to surge. Thousands of suspects were identified. Coordinated warrants were executed across jurisdictions. What investigators described as a deeply embedded trafficking infrastructure was suddenly under direct federal pressure. The question facing authorities was not whether the network existed, but how far it reached. At the center of the investigation were two powerful transnational organizations, the Sinaloa Cartel and the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, commonly known as CJNG. For years, both groups have been major players in the North American narcotics pipeline, moving heroin, fentanyl, cocaine, and methamphetamine across borders with logistical precision. Their operations are not improvised. They rely on encrypted communications, layered distribution networks, compartmentalized cells, and complex financial laundering systems designed to shield leadership from exposure. The opioid crisis had already placed enormous strain on communities across the United States. Overdose fatalities were climbing. Synthetic opioids were spreading rapidly. The scale of trafficking activity demanded a coordinated response. That response became a 43-day campaign built on months of surveillance, informant intelligence, wire intercepts, and financial tracking. Federal agencies, including the FBI, DEA, and ICE, aligned efforts with state and local law enforcement to synchronize warrants and prevent suspects from slipping through jurisdictional gaps. Investigators mapped supply routes, identified mid-level distributors, flagged financial conduits. Every move required timing. This was not simply about confiscating narcotics. Authorities aimed to disrupt transportation corridors, freeze assets, and fracture the command structure supporting distribution networks that extended beyond drugs into money laundering and other organized criminal enterprises. Behind closed doors, strategy sessions unfolded over digital maps and live data feeds. Analysts tracked movement patterns. Field teams prepared simultaneous entries. Intelligence units verified targets repeatedly, because one misstep could compromise weeks of coordination. Cartel structures are adaptive. When pressure rises in one region, activity shifts to another. When communication channels are exposed, new ones appear. This operation required anticipating those adjustments before they happened. Night after night, teams staged equipment, confirmed warrants, and rehearsed entry protocols. Drones provided aerial overwatch. Wiretap intelligence refined timelines. Surveillance units maintained visual confirmation of high-priority targets. Failure was not an option. If the network remained intact, distribution would continue, and the consequences would return to the streets. As sunset approached along key trafficking corridors near the US-Mexico border, teams moved into position. The objective was clear: disrupt the operational core of a supply chain believed to support thousands of transactions across multiple states. More than 1,000 suspects had already been flagged for arrest. This was not a routine enforcement action. It was a calculated strike against a trafficking infrastructure built over years, structured, compartmentalized, and protected by layers of logistics and finance. At the operational center were the DEA and FBI working alongside local authorities, coordinating entries designed to limit escape routes and preserve evidentiary chains. Agents understood the risks. Many targets were believed to have access to weapons and counter-surveillance tools. Preparation was meticulous. Inside command posts, screens displayed live feeds. Communications were tight. Timelines locked. The next phase was about to begin. High above the desert corridor, radar arrays tracked movement patterns in real time. Unmanned aerial vehicles hovered silently, streaming live thermal imagery back to command centers. On the ground, surveillance teams monitored traffic routes, warehouse access points, and suspected transfer hubs. For weeks, investigators had studied shipment rhythms, vehicle rotations, and encrypted communications. By the time tactical teams mobilized, the intelligence picture was layered and precise. Then the green light was given. Simultaneous entries were executed across multiple locations. SWAT units surrounded key facilities identified as distribution nodes. These were not ordinary storage sites. Reinforced steel doors, layered access systems, counter-surveillance cameras, and armed security indicated long-term operational planning. When the first compound was breached, the scale became undeniable. Agents moved methodically, door to door, corridor to corridor, clearing rooms and securing occupants. Inside, hidden compartments revealed bulk quantities of fentanyl, methamphetamine, and cocaine packaged for interstate distribution. Vacuum-sealed bricks were concealed inside machinery, false walls, and underground storage cavities. The volume suggested not a local ring, but a coordinated supply hub capable of feeding multiple markets simultaneously. Each structure presented risk. Tactical teams treated every hallway as a potential ambush point. Evidence technicians followed closely behind entry units, documenting seizures to preserve chain of custody integrity. During one phase of the operation, intelligence units confirmed the presence of a high-ranking cartel figure believed to oversee regional logistics. Surveillance teams relayed vehicle movement in real time. Within minutes, pursuit units were deployed. The chase was controlled but urgent. Coordinated vehicles, aerial overwatch, and road containment strategies converged. The suspect attempted to flee but was intercepted before reaching secondary support routes. The arrest marked a significant disruption in the network's operational leadership. Yet the broader mission remained active. Every seizure weakened financial throughput. Every arrest disrupted communication chains. But dismantling a structure built over years required sustained pressure. As additional sites were searched, investigators uncovered evidence of financial laundering systems intertwined with narcotics distribution, shell businesses, layered transfers, and bulk currency storage designed to obscure origin trails. Momentum was building. Federal agencies, including the FBI, DEA, and ICE, continued executing synchronized warrants across jurisdictions. Intelligence fusion centers updated target lists hourly. Analysts monitored shifts in cartel communications as news of the raids spread internally through their networks. What became increasingly clear was the structural depth of the enterprise. This was not a single warehouse operation. It was a modular system. Supply intake, regional staging, financial routing, and street-level distribution operating in coordinated tiers. One warehouse, located on the outskirts of a major metropolitan area, appeared outwardly unremarkable. Industrial exterior, minimal signage, standard delivery access. Inside, however, investigators uncovered concealed compartments beneath reinforced flooring. Stacks of bundled currency were discovered alongside large narcotics reserves prepared for packaging. The objective was never solely about confiscation. Disrupting this site interrupted supply flow, froze working capital, and sent a signal throughout the trafficking corridor that the network's infrastructure had been penetrated. As agents secured the premises, forensic teams began cataloging assets. Digital devices were isolated. Financial records were preserved. Logistics manifests were analyzed on site to identify secondary distribution links. The operation was still unfolding. With each hour, the scope expanded, revealing a system designed for resilience but now facing coordinated, sustained enforcement pressure. And this phase was far from over. Flashlights swept across concrete walls, cutting through dust-filled air and illuminating what agents had just uncovered. Stacks of narcotics, bulk currency, and weapons staged for rapid distribution. For a brief moment, the magnitude of the discovery settled in. Then the atmosphere shifted. Movement, footsteps deeper inside the structure. A sudden gunshot echoed across the warehouse floor. Tactical units immediately repositioned, taking cover behind reinforced columns and storage pallets. Commands were issued clearly over radio channels. What had begun as a controlled breach turned into a live engagement with armed suspects attempting to resist arrest. Gunfire cracked through the structure, ricocheting off steel beams. Agents responded with disciplined, measured force, advancing only when sectors were secured. Every movement was deliberate, every angle cleared twice. This was no improvised resistance. The individuals inside understood the stakes. They had layered defensive positions and escape routes built into the facility's layout. But preparation met preparation. Room by room, tactical teams secured control points, isolating threats and separating suspects from access to weapons. Outside, additional units reinforced the perimeter, sealing exit corridors and preventing flight vehicles from breaching containment. Coordination remained tight. Federal and local units operated under unified command, each team executing its assigned role: perimeter control, tactical entry, medical standby, and evidence protection. At one stage, a suspect attempted to break toward a rear access door. Surveillance officers tracking the exterior relayed movement instantly. The exit path was cut off within seconds. The individual was taken into custody without further escalation. Inside, the final resistance subsided. As the building was declared secure, the operational tempo shifted. Tactical teams transitioned to stabilization mode. Medical checks were conducted. Evidence technicians re-entered cleared zones to catalog seized narcotics, firearms, digital storage devices, and financial records. The raid had been contained, but the broader threat remained active. Investigators understood that operations of this scale rarely function in isolation. Supply chains adapt quickly when disrupted. Communication channels reroute. Financial nodes shift. The warehouse seizure was significant, but it was one node in a larger network. In the aftermath, analysts began reviewing intercepted communications captured during the engagement. Indicators suggested contingency planning had already been discussed within affiliated cells. Pressure in one region often triggered activity in another. As additional search warrants were executed in surrounding areas, resistance patterns varied. Some locations were abandoned, others showed signs of hurried evacuation, documents shredded, devices destroyed, transport vehicles moved. The operation was exposing not just narcotics stockpiles, but the structural mechanics of the network itself. There were also civilians in proximity to certain sites, workers, neighbors, and individuals unknowingly adjacent to cartel-controlled properties. Tactical teams adjusted approaches accordingly, prioritizing containment and de-escalation to prevent unnecessary harm. These moments required split-second judgment, maintain momentum without compromising public safety. By the time the warehouse scene was fully stabilized, investigators had secured substantial quantities of narcotics, bulk cash reserves, and operational equipment linked to trafficking distribution. The arrest count continued to rise. Yet intelligence briefings made one point clear: organizations of this magnitude do not collapse overnight. When major infrastructure is disrupted, leadership attempts to preserve what remains, rerouting assets, activating secondary cells, and limiting exposure. Which meant the next phase would be just as critical. Because dismantling a network requires more than a successful raid. It requires sustained pressure, and the operation was far from complete. But the warehouse seizure was only one phase. As warrants continued to roll out across multiple jurisdictions, operational tempo increased. Safe houses, stash locations, and secondary distribution points were identified and cleared in rapid succession. With each new site, investigators encountered stronger layers of protection. At one property, entry teams halted just inside the threshold after detection equipment flagged irregular floor density. Bomb technicians were called forward. Portions of the structure had been modified with concealed trap mechanisms designed to delay or deter entry. The discovery confirmed what analysts had suspected. The network had invested heavily in defensive infrastructure. In another densely populated neighborhood, agents executed a coordinated entry on a warehouse believed to function as a regional consolidation hub. Externally, the building appeared inactive. Internally, it had reinforced access points, compartmentalized rooms, and concealed storage cavities built behind false walls. Resistance was immediate. Armed individuals inside attempted to hold defensive positions while others moved towards secondary escape paths. Tactical teams adjusted quickly, prioritizing containment and civilian safety given the surrounding residential area. Every movement required calculation. Inside the structure, agents located hidden passageways, narrow tunnel corridors previously used to move narcotics and weapons without detection. These escape routes, once logistical advantages, became focal points for containment teams deploying ground-penetrating radar and aerial thermal imaging to prevent flight. The operation expanded across state lines as affiliated cells responded to pressure. Some locations were abandoned, others showed signs of last-minute asset relocation. Intelligence units worked continuously to intercept rerouted communications and identify fallback sites. At several points, tactical units encountered fortified interiors designed to slow advancement, reinforced doors, layered barricades, and controlled sightlines intended to create defensive choke points. Despite the resistance, entries were completed methodically. Interagency coordination remained critical. FBI, DEA, ICE, and local partners operated through centralized command channels to prevent overlap and maintain real-time situational awareness. Medical teams, perimeter units, and evidence recovery specialists rotated seamlessly through active sites. There was no margin for error. Every decision balanced operational momentum with public safety. Residential proximity meant de-escalation and containment were often prioritized over aggressive pursuit. As the sweep progressed, the cumulative impact became clear. Seizure totals began climbing into unprecedented territory. By the time the primary operational window concluded, authorities reported confiscation of approximately 91 tons of illegal narcotics across coordinated actions. The volume included fentanyl, methamphetamine, heroin, and cocaine intercepted before reaching distribution markets. To contextualize the scale, analysts noted that synthetic opioid quantities seized during the operation represented millions of potentially lethal doses prevented from entering circulation. Beyond narcotics, investigators secured bulk currency reserves, weapons caches, encrypted communication devices, and financial documentation tied to laundering operations. The numbers were staggering, but so was the structural insight gained. What began as targeted enforcement had revealed a highly organized, multi-tiered trafficking system capable of shifting assets rapidly under pressure. The disruption was significant, but intelligence assessments cautioned against assuming collapse. Organizations of this magnitude adapt. Still, the cumulative effect of synchronized raids, asset seizures, and leadership arrests had fundamentally altered the operational landscape. The network had been penetrated at multiple levels: logistics, finance, and command. And while the campaign was not yet finished, the balance had shifted. The question now was not just how much had been seized, but how the remaining infrastructure would respond. Alongside the narcotics, authorities recovered approximately $20 million in bulk currency, operational capital tied directly to distribution networks, as well as hundreds of firearms stored inside the facilities. These were not isolated caches. They were components of a structured trafficking infrastructure built for scale. Inside the sprawling warehouses, what had once been concealed in darkness was now cataloged under evidence lights. Pallets of narcotics packaged for interstate shipment. Ledger records, encrypted devices, layered storage compartments engineered to evade detection. The scale of organization was undeniable. This network had not grown overnight. It was structured, compartmentalized, and reinforced over years. It required coordinated federal, state, and local enforcement efforts to map even a fraction of its operational depth. Then came the arrests. Individuals long identified through surveillance and intelligence analysis were taken into custody. Logistics coordinators, regional distributors, financial facilitators. For many of them, years of operational insulation had ended in a matter of hours. Yet the tone inside command centers was measured. Success was clear, but so was the broader reality. Organizations of this magnitude do not disappear after a single sweep. Disruption alters supply chains. It pressures leadership. It fractures coordination. But resilience and adaptation remain built into their structure. The 43-day operation resulted in more than 1,000 arrests and the seizure of 91 tons of narcotics. By any metric, it was significant. Still, analysts understand that the illicit drug economy operates on supply, demand, and incentive. When one corridor is disrupted, others attempt to form. When leadership is removed, succession mechanisms activate. The individuals arrested represent part of a larger system, a system sustained by global trafficking routes, financial pipelines, and technological adaptation. Cartels today rely on encrypted platforms, compartmentalized communication cells, aerial reconnaissance tools, and underground transit systems. Their methods evolve continuously. Enforcement strategies must evolve as well. This operation shifted the operational landscape. It exposed vulnerabilities. It interrupted revenue flow. It delivered a measurable impact, but it did not end the larger challenge. As long as transnational criminal enterprises remain profitable, enforcement agencies will continue refining intelligence models, expanding interagency coordination, and adjusting strategy to match emerging tactics. The next phase will not look identical to the last. It rarely does. The question moving forward is not whether pressure will continue. It will, but how the structure on the other side adapts. And that adaptation will define what comes next. If you want clear, measured breakdowns of complex operations like this, without sensationalism and without political spin, subscribe to State Tone. Here we focus on the facts, the structure behind the headlines, and what large-scale operations actually mean for institutions, communities, and policy. If this analysis gave you a deeper understanding of how these networks operate, leave your perspective in the comments. Because the story doesn't end with a raid, and the next chapter is already forming.